ladies and gentlemen, on the harmonica, Jimmy Sengenberger. Welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads, the show with probably the only host in the country that will actually welcome a senior member of the Trump administration by playing harmonica. I am Jimmy Sengenberger, joined now, and so pleased to be, by the administrator for the Environmental Protection Agency on our first Free to Choose Friday, focusing on the free market and environmental protection. Mr. Administrator Andrew Wheeler, welcome to the show. Good to have you here.
That was the best introduction I have ever had on any show I have ever been on. That was incredible harmonica playing. I loved it.
Well, thank you. I thought you might.
I really don't want to I think your listeners would rather listen to you play more than hear me talk.
All right, then I'll apply. Here's what I like to do. We like to have fun here on this show and do things that are a little bit unorthodox. And I think the reason why, more than anything, not just because I like to do it, I enjoy playing the harmonica, but it's because things are so darn serious right now. And we need to cut loose and relax a little bit, I think.
We do. Things are serious. We need to take them seriously, but, we need to also see the humor in everyday life.
So,
and I think that's important. And, laughter is the best medicine. There's a lot of stress out there, and we need to calm people down some, and we need to just relax. It's interesting. I did a conference call yesterday with my Region 7 staff, and there's about 500 of them on the phone, and this was out of our Kansas City office, and they've been doing a weekly competition each week at the end of the staff meeting to this week was the most appropriate country music song title to represent the coronavirus. And the title that won, I nominated Crazy by Patsy Cline, but the title that won was an old Kitty Wells song, which I'd never heard of before. It was something along the lines, Only My Hairdresser and I Know the Truth, which is perfect for this time. Last week it was a movie title, and it was Home Alone was the movie title that won last week in their competition.
You have some creative people. We had a very serious
meeting for 30 minutes, and we ended it with a nice lighthearted.
So I think that's
effort.
Fantastic. At the end, I will then ask you a question related to what you were saying with country music and me playing harmonica and that sort of thing. And I'll hold that to the end so we can also end on a similar note like that and sort of where we began. But Administrator Wheeler, I really appreciate you coming on to talk with us today. I've interviewed a couple of times on the radio and always enjoy our conversations. And I want to dive right in. I mean, today is our inaugural Free to Choose Friday here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, somewhat in honor of Milton Friedman, but also because of the fact that we as human beings have the right to choose and should be able to. And part of that means being able to innovate and choose creatively how to address environmental problems. That's what we've been talking about, the whole theme of today. And I'd love your overall view on how you approach environmental protection, because I'm guessing it's not that you want to destroy the environment, because I hear that a heck of a lot.
I hear that about me, but it's certainly not true.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank
exactly.
you. I'm actually an Eagle Scout. I still go hiking and camping. I love the outdoors. The last thing I want to do is do anything that will harm the environment. And the mission of my agency, the Environmental Protection Agency, is to protect public health and the environment. And so we have a dual mission here, and we are exercising that. But you're right. There's sensible ways of doing this. Perfect example is, we just finalized our CAFE standards for cars a couple of weeks ago. And what it did is replaced the second half of the Obama regulations. The Obama regulations were in two halves, and we just replaced the second half. The first half that they did back in 2012 projected by 2026 that half of the cars on the road would be electric vehicles. Right now it's less than 5%, and there's no way we would ever meet the 50%. So their standards were based on that premise, and that was what they were driving to. And that's ignoring what Americans want to buy, the cars they want to purchase, and as a result, the average age of cars on the road today is now 12 years old. It used to be 8, because people are holding onto their cars longer because the cars that are being produced aren't the cars that people want to buy, or they're too expensive. So we did our regulation. It's going to help lower the price of new cars, and it's going to allow automobile manufacturers to continue to produce cars that meet environmental standards that people want to purchase. To me, that's very common sense.
Yeah, I think it really is true in that way, where if you enable people to purchase what they want to purchase, and understand also that fuel economy standards is something that if you're going to buy a new car, you absolutely are looking for a vehicle that's going to be good on fuel economy. But since you mentioned the point about how expensive it can be for a new car compared with an old vehicle, particularly because of these regulations, I have no choice. We played this in the beginning of the show. I want to get your reaction. This is 1979, Milton Friedman on Phil Donahue's show making that exact point. I think there's just such resonance.
The thing that amazes me about people who make statements like this is their neglect of history. This country went for close to 200 years without a Ralph Nader and without these regulations. And that was a period in which this country had its greatest growth, in which people streamed to it from all over the world and were able to make a better life for themselves and their children. If you take the automobile industry in particular, since Henry Ford really revolutionized it, it transformed the nature of life in this country. The automobiles improved tremendously. They came down in cost relative to other goods. The effect of the kind of regulations you now have has been to make automobiles not more safe, but less safe. Why? Because by making them more expensive, they make it pay to keep an old car on the road longer. The average age of cars on the road has gone up, and old cars are less safe than new cars.
Administrator Wheeler, it seems that the more things change, the more government stays the same.
I think if you play the harmonica and Milton Friedman all day, we'd be much better off as a country.
There's a reason why Ken Starr calls me Jimmy the Harmonica Man, so I appreciate that. Glad you're enjoying it. But the point is just so well made. So, Administrator Wheeler, go ahead, please.
It's absolutely, and we're making the same point this year about cars and the difference between our regulations and the Obama regulations. And I loved that he brought up Ralph Nader. Probably a lot of your listeners, although Ralph Nader's still around, he's not as active as he used to be. He came to fame back in the late 60s where he went after the Corvair, and he called it unsafe at any speed. The first car I drove when I turned 16 in the mid 80s was a Corvair. It was a 20-year-old Corvair, but I loved it. And the way to make it safe was to put some weights because the engine was in the back. If you just put some weights in the front of the car, you had no problem with it. And it was a cheap, well-made car, got great fuel economy, and because of his book Unsafe at Any Speed, General Motors quit making it.
So fuel economy standards are one area in which the Trump administration has been scaling back some of the, I would say, overburdensome regulations that we've seen in recent years. There are other efforts as well. Bring us up to speed on some of the other initiatives that the Environmental Protection Agency has been working on, say, over the last several months to a year.
Sure. Well, in January, we finalized our WOTUS regulations. This is Waters of the U.S. This was again, to replace an Obama regulation that just did not work. And what we set out to do on the WOTUS regulation was to define for your average landowner so that they know whether or not their property falls under the federal jurisdiction. In the past, people had to spend a lot of money going to hire lawyers to try to figure out whether or not they met the federal definition. We try to have a very clear-cut, easy-to-understand definition so that your average farmer, homeowner can tell whether or not their property falls under that. We also, for the first time ever, differentiated between state waters and federal waterways. If the federal government were to stop regulating water tomorrow, and we aren't, and we didn't, and we're not going to, most of the waterways were already being protected by state laws. And then third, we also wanted to follow, and this may sound surprising to some people, certainly is surprising to people inside the Beltway, Washington, D.C. Beltway. We wanted a regulation that will be upheld by the courts and stand the test of time, because the water regulations have been flip-flopping back and forth between the Supreme Court and the other courts for about 20 years now. And we need certainty. The American public needs certainty. I really fundamentally believe that if people know what the rules are and they understand the rules, they will comply with them. We don't need to force a lot of bureaucratic red tape on your average citizen that requires them to hire attorneys and possibly violate the law unintentionally. We need to have better understood regulations.
One other thing that the Trump administration has done is not defend the Clean Power Plan in court and instead institute the Affordable Clean Energy Rule. And I want to be very clear that I said not defend it in court and instead institute an alternative, because it isn't that you scrapped the Clean Power Plan that the Obama administration had put into place, because as you and I have talked about before, it never went into effect. Can you tell us a little bit about, especially because climate change is a big issue of concern to young Americans, about the Clean Power Plan, why it was such a bad deal economically, but also the history legally with that, and then also what this ACE rule does?
Sure. So what the Obama administration did on their Clean Power Plan is they went what's called outside of the fence line. The EPA, through the Clean Air Act, has regulated power plants for years, but when we regulate a power plant, we regulate what's actually happening inside the power plant. And what the Obama administration did with their Clean Power Plan was direct basically the power plants to make decisions for everyone outside of the confines of their fence line. And it made no sense. And it was litigated. Actually, it didn't even get through the regular briefings. It went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court issued a stay and said this rule is not into effect until it can be fully litigated, because we believe, and they only issue a stay when they believe that that the regulation will fall, that it won't be held constitutional. So the Supreme Court stepped in, and the Clean Power Plan never took effect. So we came in, the Trump administration, we looked at it and we said, we can't defend that. The Supreme Court has already said they issued the stay. It's outside the bounds of the Clean Air Act. It doesn't even follow the 30, 40-year history of the Clean Air Act. So we took a look at the requirement, which is to reduce CO2 emissions from power plants, and we put forward a regulation which will require power plants to reduce their emissions power plant by power plant. We set up different standards based upon the type of fuel and the type of power plant it is, but all power plants will have to reduce their CO2 emissions. We are actively addressing climate change. I know a lot of young people are concerned about climate change, and we're doing something about climate change. Our ACE rule, which we finalized last summer, will reduce CO2 emissions from the power plant sector, and our CAFE standards that we just finalized a few weeks ago that I talked about a minute ago will reduce CO2 emissions 1.5% per year from now until 2026. So we are addressing climate change, but we're doing it within the confines of the laws that Congress passed. What the previous administration tried to do was to go outside the laws. Everything they worked on was tied to climate change, and they ignored a lot of other things that the agency was supposed to be doing. A great example is the Brownfields program. They were letting, and Superfund sites, they were letting those go, particularly the Superfund sites. They weren't getting them cleaned up. Last year we got 27 Superfund sites delisted from the priority list. We got them cleaned up more than any year since 2001. We're focused on getting these contaminated sites around the country cleaned up. And when you get a site cleaned up, or you put money in the Brownfields program to clean up a site in an inner city, that injects more investment into those communities. And a lot of this is going to low-income minority communities where we're getting these old sites cleaned up once and for all, so that the communities where they live can start new businesses. More private sector investment goes into them. It's going to really help a lot of Americans everywhere they live. We're
talking with the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, Andrew Wheeler. Just a couple minutes left with you, and I got a couple quick hit questions here. One, I think that while the EPA is still fulfilling its mission to protect the environment, and that's the whole point. And so you do have a regulatory role. One of the themes that we've been hitting on, in fact, the most prominent theme of today's show here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, has been the fact that the private sector has been leading innovation, and we should not have this government knows best attitude with the Green New Deal, a clean power plan, the Paris Climate Accord, and so forth. Some support from the government, encouragement, incentives in place, and what have you is all well and good, but you have to understand that a top-down micromanagement approach is not going to do the trick to protect the environment or address climate change. Much better to do what you can to unleash the unlimited potential of private sector innovation.
Absolutely. We're trying to take away a lot of the red tape that has been hampering these businesses, and we're trying to address that in everything we do.
It's very costly, too. Can you just give us a sense for the cost of some of the regulations that you have been rolling back or not overburdening businesses with?
Oh, we have, I believe, the savings so far is, I want to say around $20 billion in regulatory savings.
Sounds right.
But by the end of this year, it should be over $100 billion.
Wow, that is remarkable to think about. Let me ask you two final questions. One, President Trump, I mean, there are areas where he is very attentive to as President of the United States. We've seen certain policy issues where he's taken them on full bore as the president. How has he worked with and interacted with the EPA as far as giving guidance or direction? To what extent does he sort of say, hey, Andrew, go ahead and do what you think is needed to be done. Come to me if you need help, versus, hey, I'm going to be very in tune on every little thing. Because I like the fact that he often delegates to different individuals like yourself who understand these certain areas.
He does delegate, but I'll tell you, the day he called me to ask me to take over the agency, he told me to continue to clean up the air, continue to clean up the water, and continue to deregulate in order to help create jobs. He knows we can do all three. I know we can do all three, and you know we can do all three at the same time. But I'll tell you, every time I've gone in to brief him on our issues, and I've done it multiple times, he is always well briefed before I get in the room, before I enter the Oval Office. He knows the issue. He asks me the pertinent questions. He gets to the heart of the issue, and it's really amazing. But a lot of it comes from having been a businessman and having to fall under a number of regulations from a number of different agencies and departments. He gets that intuitively, and he asks the exact right questions, and he gives me the best advice.
Finally, since we were starting off with music, what is your favorite kind of music? I can't not ask that question. I have a strong passion for music. So, what do you enjoy?
I don't know that I have a particular type. I go through phases. I went through a phase of listening to a lot of this, like just over the last year or two, the 70s rock.
I love that.
The Pink Floyd and the Led Zeppelin. I love country. I really like the Ken Burns country documentary he did last fall. I really enjoyed that. Did you get a chance to watch that?
I have not, but it's good.
I highly recommend it. I learned so much more about country music and how country music influenced rock music. And I didn't realize what a visionary Mother Maybelle Carter was. And she had, I guess it was called the Carter slide on the guitar that has been mimicked by rock and roll guitar players ever since.
Oh, wow.
It's amazing. I love looking at the roots of music and how they all interact. But I'm not a big pop fan, but I really do like some just hardcore rock and roll music.
Well, I will just say that, yes, country certainly had an influence on rock, but the blues had a baby, and they called it rock and roll, as the great late Muddy Waters would say.
Sure.
And Mr. Administrator Andrew Wheeler,
Absolutely.
let me give you a proper outro since you enjoyed the intro. Andrew Wheeler, Administrator for the Environmental Protection Agency, thanks so much for coming on today. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm happy to come on anytime. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you. Again, EPA Administrator Andrew Wheeler joining us here on Free to Choose Friday. Look, it's Friday. I was seeing hashtag #FeelGoodFriday trending. For 2.5 years, I hosted a show in Denver called Business for Breakfast. It was a weekday morning show. And every Friday we had the best bumper music known to man as we would enjoy a feel-good Friday. I'm feeling good on a Friday. Why not lighten the mood just a little bit? We all need it. That's for darn sure. Thanks for watching this clip from Jimmy at the Crossroads. You do not want to miss a minute of engaging, intelligent talk. Subscribe today to the Jimmy at the Crossroads YouTube channel, and you'll be sure to catch our live broadcast. I appreciate your support.
I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of no sense. Yeah.